Ace Frehley, one of the founding members of the rock group Kiss, has died. He was 74.
Gene Simmons has never been just the bassist of Kiss. He's been a phenomenon. Every move, every word, every outrageous act has drawn the spotlight like metal to a magnet. For half a century he's provoked, fascinated, and occasionally horrified the world with the scale of his ambition. From the fire-breathing theatrics that redefined arena rock to the business empire built on his own face, Simmons has lived larger than life and made sure everyone knew it. But something new has surfaced. A revelation that once again reminds us there's more to Gene Simmons than the leather, the makeup, and the money. Behind the legend lies a story carved from hardship, obsession, and relentless reinvention. What was just revealed about him has fans speechless, and it forces the world to look past the mask and see the man who created the demon. This is the full story of Gene Simmons. From a boy, scarred by war, to a rock icon who built his own mythology and then watched it consume him. Long before the world knew his name, Gene Simmons was Chaim Witz, born on August 25, 1949 in Haifa, Israel. His beginnings were steeped in shadows of survival. His mother, Flora Klein, was a Hungarian Jew who had endured the unspeakable during the Holocaust. As a teenager, she was forced into Nazi labor camps, where she picked potatoes under the eyes of soldiers with rifles and saw her mother taken to the gas chambers. When the war ended, Flora was 20 years old, young, alive, but scarred beyond repair. She rarely spoke about what she had seen. Her silence filled their small apartment like a ghost. Chaim would sometimes wake in the night to see her staring into nothing, tears on her face as if the memories still hunted her. After the war, she married Ferry Witz, another Hungarian survivor. Together, they left Europe for Israel in 1947, chasing safety and a new start. But safety did not mean comfort. They lived in poverty, patching together hope with what little they could earn. By the time Chaim was 6, the marriage had fallen apart. His father remained in Israel. His mother worked endless shifts in sewing factories, coming home with raw hands and a tired smile. Food was scarce. Dinner might be bread dipped in milk if they were lucky. To help, the small boy gathered wild fruit to sell by the roadside. When the weather turned cold, he cut up an old army blanket and stitched it into a coat. Out of necessity, he learned the value of hard work and the power of transformation. Languages fascinated him. By 7, he spoke Hebrew, Hungarian, and Turkish. Then one day, a stack of American comic books changed everything. Superman, Batman, Spider-Man. Stories of ordinary men who became extraordinary through will and disguise. Chaim didn't just read them. He absorbed them. They became blueprints for the kind of person he wanted to become. In 1957, Flora made the bravest decision of her life. With little money and no English, she took her 8-year-old son to Queens, New York, searching for opportunity. For Chaim, America was dazzling and alien. Glowing TV screens, strange foods, new rules. But school was brutal. His accent drew laughter. His thrift store clothes drew sneers. Once again, he was an outsider. To survive, he reinvented himself. Chaim became Eugene Klein, the name smoother, the identity safer. It was the first of many transformations, but not the last. Life in Queens tested Eugene's resolve daily. His mother still worked double shifts, sometimes sleeping in her chair from exhaustion. Money was tight, and Eugene learned to hustle. He sold cactuses door to door, delivered newspapers, even picked fruit in the summer. None of it made him rich, but every dollar taught him how survival depended on persistence. Yet amid the struggle, he discovered an escape. American pop culture. Television, radio, comic books. They offered a world where anyone could be heroic. Eugene studied these icons like textbooks, analyzing how celebrities carried themselves, how they held attention, how they crafted images bigger than reality itself. Then came February 1964. The Beatles stepped onto the stage of The Ed Sullivan Show, and the world exploded in screams. Eugene watched in awe as 4 ordinary young men became gods in 3 minutes. It was the moment his destiny crystallized. He didn't just want to play music. He wanted to command it. He scraped together money for his first guitar, practiced until his fingers bled, and dreamed of crowds chanting his name. He experimented with local bands, imitating everything from Elvis to the Rolling Stones, trying to find a sound that matched the grandeur in his imagination. But dreams are expensive. After high school, he attended Sullivan County Community College studying education, a practical choice, not a passionate one. He earned his associate degree and took a job teaching sixth graders in Spanish Harlem. The pay was $75 a week. The reward was minimal. Every morning he looked at the blackboard and saw not children but a barrier between him and the stage he craved. Still, the classroom gave him something valuable, the ability to perform. Standing before restless students honed his stage presence, and late at night when lessons were done, he wrote songs. Each chord was a step toward escape. Eugene Klein, the struggling teacher, was starting to imagine his next transformation. Gene Simmons, the performer. By the late 1960s, New York pulsed with the sound of ambition, garage rock folk psychedelia. Eugene Dovian, he teamed up with a talented young guitarist named Paul Stanley, another dreamer unwilling to accept obscurity. Together they formed Rainbow, a modest start that soon evolved into Wicked Lester by 1970. Wicked Lester blended folk, rock, and the unpredictable spirit of the era. The lineup included Steve Coronel, Brooke Ostrander, and Tony Zarella. For 2 years they rehearsed obsessively, pouring every idea into their music. They secured studio time at Electric Lady Studios, the temple Jimi Hendrix had built, and recorded a full album financed by Epic Records. When the record was finished, they were certain stardom was near. But the label's A&R director Don Ellis despised it. He called the songs unfocused and unsellable. The album was shelved before it ever saw daylight. For Gene, it was devastation. All his savings, his hope, his identity wanted gone. But instead of surrendering, he realized that talent wasn't enough. Image mattered, discipline mattered, control mattered. Years later, when Kiss ruled the world, he and Paul Stanley would buy back those Wicked Lester master tapes for $138,000 just to make sure the world would never hear their failure. Out of the ashes, Gene and Paul decided to build something entirely new, louder, simpler, and unforgettable. They envisioned a band that looked like superheroes, sounded like thunder, and played like their lives depended on it. It wouldn't just perform, it would conquer. Thus began the blueprint for Kiss. In 1973, Gene Simmons began crafting the persona that would immortalize him. Music alone was no longer enough. Audiences needed theater spectacle, something mythic. Influenced by horror films, comic book villains, and the shock rock antics of Alice Cooper, Gene painted his face in black and white, with wings stretching from his eyes. He breathed fire, spat blood, and moved with the menacing grace of a creature from another world. This was the demon. The first Kiss performance took place on January 30th, 1973, at a small Queens club called the Coventry. Only 3 people watched, most of them girlfriends of the band. Yet the energy in that room was electric. For the first time, Gene breathed fire on stage, nearly burning his hair off, yet and loved every second. Soon Kiss played anywhere that would have them. Word spread about the bizarre new band with the monstrous makeup. In August, they performed at the Hotel Diplomat in Manhattan, where television director Bill Aucoin happened to be in the crowd. He was blown away. He offered to manage them, promising a record deal within 2 weeks. True to his word, by November 1973, Kiss had signed with Casablanca Records, a fledgling label run by Neil Bogart. They rushed into the studio, recording their debut album released in February 1974. The reviews were mixed. The sales were worse, but Kiss refused to slow down. Instead, they hit the road, playing more than 300 shows in 1974 alone. The concerts were chaos and electricity, pyrotechnics, explosions, blood, smoke. While radio ignored them, crowds multiplied. Kids who saw them live became instant believers. Gene understood the power of myth. Off-stage, he maintained the demon's mystique, rarely appearing without makeup. He turned interviews into performances, speaking with authority, projecting confidence that bordered on arrogance. Every sneer, every tongue flick became part of the legend. By late 1975, the gamble paid off. Their live double album, Alive, it captured the raw thunder of their shows. It went quadruple platinum, selling more than 4 million copies. The record saved both Kiss and Casablanca Records from financial ruin. Suddenly, the band was unstoppable. Hit albums followed: Destroyer, Love Gun, Rock and Roll Over. The Kiss Army was born, millions strong. Kids painted their faces to match their heroes. Lunchboxes, comic books, and pinball machines bore the logo. And at the center of it all stood Gene Simmons, The man who had willed himself out of poverty and into legend, now ruling the stage like a fire-breathing god. As the music empire expanded, Gene Simmons' personal life became its own headline. While many rock stars drowned in drugs and alcohol, Gene bragged that he avoided both entirely. His addiction, he said, was women. Across interviews and talk shows, he claimed to have slept with over 4,600 partners, sometimes even rounding the number up to 5,000. What truly shocked people wasn't the boast itself, but the way he documented it. Simmons carried a Polaroid camera on the road. After each encounter, he'd ask the woman to hold up her hotel key while he snapped a photo, evidence of conquest. He stored the pictures in boxes, hundreds upon hundreds of faces cataloged like trophies. To him, it was harmless record-keeping. To others, it was disturbing. Rock contemporaries like Grace Slick of Jefferson Airplane publicly condemned it, calling it demeaning. But Simmons didn't care. The demon fed on notoriety. Every scandal added fuel to his image of dominance, of the untouchable alpha. In truth, behind the bravado lay the same hunger that had driven him since childhood, the need to prove he was powerful, desirable, above rejection. Fame had given him the stage. Now he sought control in his private life too. As Kiss reached superstardom, Gene diversified. He licensed everything: Kiss lunchboxes, action figures, condoms, even coffins. If it could bear the logo, it was for sale. Critics accused him of turning art into commerce. Gene called it smart business. But the Polaroids remained his most infamous collection, a secret archive that symbolized both his ego and his emptiness. Decades later, his longtime partner Shannon Tweed discovered the stash. The former Playboy model had been with Gene for nearly 3 decades, enduring his public image but demanding private loyalty. When she saw the photos, she was furious. In 2011, on their reality show Gene Simmons' Family Jewels, Shannon burned the entire collection on camera. Thousands of Polaroids, decades of conquests, turned to ash. Gene watched silently. Later, he admitted it hurt. Not because he lost the images, but because it marked the end of the persona he'd lived for so long. That was the demon, he said quietly. And he died that day. The burn became symbolic. The moment Gene Simmons separated the man from the myth. For more than 50 years, Gene Simmons has walked the line between man and myth. The boy who once sold fruit on the roadside in Haifa became the fire-spitting face of one of rock's biggest bands. He built an empire from ambition, discipline, and an unyielding belief in spectacle. But behind the theatrics lies the same truth that haunted his childhood: survival. His mother's silence, the hunger, the humiliation, they shaped every move he made. The demon was not born from darkness alone. He was a defense, a shield forged to keep pain at bay. Now, decades later, with Kiss announcing their final tours and Simmons stepping back from the fire, the world is finally seeing the man behind the mask. The recent revelations, the destroyed Polaroids, his reflections on mortality, and his quieter life with Shannon Tweed, show a different Gene Simmons, still confident, still unapologetic, but more human than ever. His story is not just about fame or excess. It's about transformation, the power to rebuild yourself again and again until the world takes notice. Because Gene Simmons didn't just become a rock legend. He became proof that even in the loudest lives, silence and the kind his mother carried can echo the longest. By the 1980s, Gene Simmons had already conquered the world as the demon of Kiss. But even legends reach a point where the mask begins to crack. After years of pyrotechnics, blood-spitting, and endless touring, Simmons found himself asking a question he hadn't faced before: who am I without the makeup? In 1983, Kiss made a shocking decision. On MTV, in front of millions of viewers, Gene Simmons and his bandmates took off their iconic makeup for the very first time. It was the end of an era and the start of a new one. For the first time in a decade, fans saw the real faces behind the personas. The reveal was both liberating and terrifying. Without the demon's armor, Gene had to prove that he was more than just a costume. The band's sound shifted too. They leaned into glam metal, experimenting with radio-friendly hits like Heaven's on Fire and Lick It Up. While fans were divided, the gamble paid off. Kiss found a second life in a decade dominated by MTV, neon lights, and excess. But behind the scenes, Gene's world was changing fast. Fame wasn't enough anymore. He wanted control, not just of his music, but his image, his money, and his future. If Gene Simmons wasn't performing, he was selling. From the very beginning, he saw Kiss not just as a band, but as a brand. Action figures, comic books, lunchboxes, even a Kiss coffin. Nothing was off the table. While critics mocked him for commercializing rock and roll, Gene saw it as genius. "You work once and you get paid forever," he often said. By the 1990s, Kiss merchandise had earned over $1 billion worldwide. Behind every outrageous deal was Gene's relentless ambition. He trademarked everything and even his stage persona. He negotiated every detail, sometimes to the frustration of his bandmates. But in Gene's eyes, success wasn't about luck or art. It was about ownership. That business mindset made him one of the wealthiest figures in rock. But it also drew a line between him and the rest of the band. To some, he was the ultimate professional. To others, he was the cold businessman who put profits before passion. While Gene's business empire grew, his personal life remained a roller coaster. His long-term relationship with model and actress Shannon Tweed became one of rock's most talked-about romances. For decades, they refused to marry, not out of doubt but out of principle. Gene, who had built his image around freedom and excess, feared commitment would tie him down. But Shannon stood by him through everything: the touring, the fame, the scandals. Together, they raised 2 children, Nick and Sophie, giving Gene a stability he never had growing up. In 2006, the world got a new look into their lives with the A&E reality show Gene Simmons' Family Jewels. The series pulled back the curtain on the man behind the demon, showing a surprisingly grounded, funny, and often awkward side of the rock star. Fans who only knew him as the fire-breathing monster saw a dad helping with homework, joking around with his kids, and struggling to say, "I love you." The show became a hit, running for 7 seasons. It wasn't just entertainment, it was redemption. It showed that even rock gods have to grow up eventually. In 2011, after 28 years together, Gene finally married Shannon Tweed in a lavish ceremony in Beverly Hills. The moment marked a new chapter, not just for Gene's family, but for the man who had spent a lifetime hiding behind a mask. But peace never lasts long in rock and roll. As Kiss continued touring into the 2010s, old wounds began to reopen. Former bandmates Ace Frehley and Peter Criss accused Gene and Paul Stanley of betrayal, claiming they had been pushed out and disrespected. The once tight brotherhood of Kiss had turned into a Cold War fought through interviews and memoirs. Gene, never one to hold back, fired right back. "They were unprofessional and unreliable," he said bluntly. "We carried them for years." His comments sparked outrage among longtime fans who still saw the original lineup as sacred. Despite the feuds, Kiss continued to dominate. Their end-of-the-road farewell tour launched in 2019, promising one final explosive goodbye. Fire, blood, and thunder. Everything that made them legends was turned up to the maximum. For Gene, it was more than a tour. It was the closing of a circle that began in small clubs in Queens 50 years earlier. When asked if this really was the end, he simply smiled and said, "Never say never." Today, Gene Simmons stands as one of the most recognizable figures in music history. He sold over 100 million albums, inspired generations of performers, and turned his name into a global empire. But beneath the armor and bravado lies a story of survival, from a poor immigrant kid selling fruit in Israel to one of the richest and most powerful men in rock. His mother's lessons in resilience and strength never left him. He turned pain into power and fear into fire. Critics may still call him arrogant, materialistic, or controversial, but even they can't deny his impact. Gene Simmons changed not just how rock stars perform, but how they think. He proved that music and money could coexist, and that a mask, when worn long enough, can become a legend. As he often says in interviews, "I'm not here to be loved. I'm here to be respected." And love him or hate him, the world still can't look away. Even in his 70s, Gene refuses to slow down. He continues to tour, invest, and appear on television, whether it's launching his own soda brand, opening restaurants, or creating a Kiss museum in Las Vegas. He keeps finding new ways to turn nostalgia into opportunity. And yet, behind every new project, there's the echo of that little boy from Haifa, the one who sewed his first coat out of an old blanket and dreamed of being a hero. In the end, Gene Simmons' story isn't just about rock music. It's about survival, reinvention, and the hunger that never fades. The demon might finally hang up his armor one day, but the legend he built will never die. From the very beginning, Gene Simmons and Kiss were never the critics' band, and they didn't want to be. Music journalists dismissed them as a circus act, calling their songs shallow and their stage shows ridiculous. To the critics, Kiss wasn't about art. It was about noise, makeup, and money. But Gene never cared about their approval. In fact, he thrived on their hate. He often said, "Critics hate what people love, and then people love Kiss." And he wasn't wrong. While the critics wrote harsh reviews, millions of fans filled arenas across the world, chanting every lyric, painting their faces like their idols, and living for the spectacle. What the critics didn't understand was that Gene never saw Kiss as just music. He saw it as theater, a grand show where every sound, every flame, every drop of fake blood mattered. To him, rock and roll wasn't about rebellion, it was about escape. He wanted kids to walk into a Kiss concert and forget the real world for 2 hours. Still, the tension with the media never went away. Even decades later, Gene faced harsh questions about selling out, commercialism, and ego. His response remained the same, sharp, unapologetic, and brutally honest. "We were never cool," he once said. "We were never the band critics loved. But we're still here, and most of them aren't." That defiance became his weapon. Every insult, every bad review, every sneer from the music elite only made Kiss stronger. Because, as Gene liked to remind people, legends aren't made by critics, they're made by fans. As the years passed, Gene Simmons transformed from a rock icon into a global businessman. He wasn't content with fame. He wanted legacy, ownership, and power. The Kiss logo became more than a symbol of a band. It became a billion-dollar empire. From action figures to credit cards, pinball machines to comic books, and even coffins, Gene turned everything into opportunity. His philosophy was simple. If it has our name on it, it should make money. And it did. By the mid-2000s, Kiss merchandise had generated more than $1.5 billion in sales worldwide, making them one of the most profitable acts in entertainment history. Gene was behind much of it, negotiating deals, designing branding strategies, and expanding the Kiss universe far beyond music. But his empire didn't stop there. Gene launched his own line of energy drinks, restaurants, books, and even reality shows. He became a motivational speaker, sharing his lessons on money, fame, and discipline with audiences around the world. "Work hard, save your money, never do drugs, and never be late," he'd tell people. The exact opposite of what most expected from a rock legend. Despite his controversial views and sometimes abrasive attitude, Gene's business mind was undeniable. He turned his stage persona into a timeless trademark, and in doing so, built a fortune that continues to grow even after half a century in the spotlight. He once said, "I didn't just play the demon, I became him in business, in life, in everything." And it's true. The fire he breathed on stage burned just as fiercely in every deal he made. In recent years, Gene Simmons has begun to look back, not just at the fame and fortune, but at the life that led him there. Beneath the bravado and sharp tongue lies a man shaped by lost love and the memory of a mother who survived the unimaginable. When Gene speaks about Flora Klein, his voice softens. He often calls her the real hero of his life, the woman who taught him resilience, hard work, and gratitude. "Everything I am," he once said, "is because of her. She made me believe I could become something more." Now, as he steps away from the endless tours and flashing lights, Gene spends more time reflecting on what really matters. He has traded the chaos of the road for quiet mornings at home in Beverly Hills, surrounded by art, family, and memories of a life lived at full volume. Yet even in reflection, the demon never fully sleeps. Gene still plans new projects, appears at conventions, and meets fans from every corner of the world. He signs autographs, cracks jokes, and shares stories from his wildest years, always reminding people that the show may end, but the spirit of Kiss will never die. In one of his last major interviews, he summed it up best. "I came from nothing. I built something, and I'll leave it behind for the next dreamer who thinks they can't make it, because if I could do it, anyone can." For Gene Simmons, it was never just about fame or fortune. It was about transformation, turning struggle into strength, survival into success, and a little boy from Israel into one of the most iconic figures in rock history.